Hey everyone, and welcome back to the House Hack podcast. We're excited today to be joined by Robert Wigley. After graduating from a business administration degree in 1983, Robert's expansive career has seen him spend 25 years in banking and across a number of senior, non-exec and trustee roles for a number of organizations, from the Bank of England, Business in the Community, and Merrill Lynch, across a number of startups and ventures as well. Focusing mainly on banking, finance and entrepreneurship, Robert has a keen interest in Generation Z and their role in the future of work. Everything from upcoming trends which impact how we work and live, and loads more. He summarizes this interest through his book, Born Digital, the story of a distracted generation, which summarizes over 200 interviews with young Gen Zers and experts. In Born Digital, Robert distills the mountains of available research on the subject and brings to bear his wealth of institutional experience to present a roadmap for society to radically and urgently reset its relationship with technology for the sake of future generations. So Robert, hopefully I've done you a service there. There's a ton to include in your intro. I hope you're having a good day so far.
All good, yeah, great introduction. Thank you for having me onto the podcast.
Amazing, super excited to get into it. So I guess gonna flip it onto your intro as well for the first thing, Robert. There's a lot to include there. You've had a long career so far, hopefully just as long a career to come. How would you summarize what you've done to date, what you do at the moment?
So I spent 25 years in the banking industry, and that all came about through meeting Mrs. Thatcher when I was 19. When I was 16, I was in a little thing called Young Enterprise at school, where you run a little business at school, and I did quite well in that. And when I was 19, in my first job, I mentored some youngsters doing the same thing. And they also won the national competition. So we decided to write to the Prime Minister and suggest that, was Mrs. Thatcher at the time, that she ensure that every school in the UK could have the experience that we'd had. Slightly to my surprise, she invited us to go and see her at Downing Street. So these three lads and I went to Downing Street the following week, made a presentation to the then Prime Minister, and the number of schools that now have Young Enterprises is thousands. It used to be a few hundred. But whilst I was there, she'd arranged for us to meet after meeting her with some bigwigs in the city. One of those was the chairman of a bank. And he said to me, you're obviously trouble. You better come and see me. If you've got in to see the Prime Minister in a few days, I want you to come to my office. So I went to his office, and it overlooked St. Paul's Cathedral. And I remember sitting there thinking, chairman of a bank, this looks really interesting. And I quite like the look of this office and the view. I think I'm going to do this. So actually, it was that inspiration from that meeting with that man that got me on the track to being a banker. So 25 years of that, at the end of which I ended up having an office overlooking St. Paul's that was actually even nicer than the one I went to when I was 19, and employing, in my case, 23,000 people in a lot of countries, with about $500 billion of gross assets on my balance sheet, which is about a third of Merrill Lynch's global balance sheet. Quite a lot of stress. And just before the financial crisis, I was asked by the Prime Minister to join the board of the Bank of England to try and help them to understand what might happen next and develop some ideas for how to deal with it. And then after the financial crisis, I left banking and started backing young entrepreneurs. So for the last 10 years, that's been my focus. And currently I chair an organization called UK Finance that represents the financial services industry. But most of my time I'm spending with people your age, helping them develop business ideas. And then I do some academic work and some philanthropic things along the side.
Amazing. Thank you for that. A huge, varied experience, but also niche experience, thinking about banking, thinking about finance. But really, what stands out to me is a kind of enterprising spark, that kind of entrepreneurial nature to your own journey. And is that something that, essentially from that original letter, you have always had, but is it something that's really always been part of your journey?
It has. So when I was 16, I had 3 little businesses that I was developing. And then, schools said, well, you look like you're doing quite well in your A-levels, so you better do A-levels. And then they said, well, you've got A-levels, so you better go and do a degree. And then someone said, well, if you've got a degree, you need a professional qualification. So you kind of wake up at 25, and any idea of being an entrepreneur has been just about beaten out of you by the academic system, which is why I ended up in banking, I guess. So when I finally got out of banking 25 years later, and happily I'd made a little bit of money and could therefore indulge my passion, that was when I went back to my original kind of entrepreneurial spirit, if you like. And I've had a hell of a lot of fun in the last 10 years working with people like you on great business ideas.
Mm. So is there an ultimate aim for you then that you're working towards, or really is it now in maybe the second half of your career that you're really indulging in some of these passions and changing, and actually it's not about having one aim but pursuing multiple aims?
You use that expression, second half, and that's a really important way of looking at it, because when I left banking, I read a book called Winning in the Second Half, which is about a CEO in the States whose company had been taken over. She was a 50-year-old lady, and she suddenly found herself with lots of free time. So she went to the doctor and had a checkup, and after the checkup, the doctor said to her, do you want the good news or the bad news? And she said, like, have I got cancer or something? And he said, no, the bad news is you're incredibly healthy, and so you're probably going to live for another 45 years when you're only 50, and I gather you haven't got a job anymore. So what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm going to get some non-executive directorships and play a bit of golf and then retire. And he said, well, you're mad. He said, you're going to live to your 95. You have to work till you're 75. If you're 50, that's 25 years. You've only worked 25 years since you left university. So stop thinking wind down and start thinking second half. And basically, that caused her to write this book called Winning in the Second Half, which simply makes the point that, for people in my age who've had an interesting career, have learned a lot, know who they like, what they like doing, and fundamentally know what makes them happy. We have the luxury of being able to indulge ourselves in what makes us happy. So let's go and do lots of that. So the trite answer to your question of what am I trying to do in the rest of my life is be happy and enjoy myself doing the things that I love doing, and hopefully in the process helping some others along their life path at the same time.
Awesome. I think that's a really refreshing outlook on that part of life, to be honest. A different way of seeing it to most people. Do you think that transition from finance has enabled you to have that viewpoint on life? And do you think if you had not made it, that you wouldn't necessarily be so happy focused as you are now? Do you think that it was a turning point, should we say, into the second half of your life?
Well, one of the things about 25 years in the banking industry is you spend a lot of time with a lot of different businesses. So you do learn a lot about what makes a business successful, what makes entrepreneurs successful, what doesn't work. And, so in the second half, I hope I can apply some of that experience to help other people's businesses develop and grow. And then I think the other thing that I've learned is I usually preface this by saying current company executive, but I don't need to because you're not my age, is that most people your age are a heck of a lot more fun than most people my age. People my age can be a little bit negative. They, prior to COVID, they wanted to talk about Brexit. Now they want to talk about COVID and COVID passports and the second vaccine and whether it's linked to blood clots. It's all kind of negative, right? Whereas your age group are very positive, enthusiastic, passionate. They're looking to the future. They're excited about what's coming. So I find every hour of every day that I spend with people your age much more fulfilling on average than it is with people my age. Of course, there are exceptions, but that's generally the truth.
Nice. And do you think that's due to naivete at a young age, or do you think that's some other factor of it being a different generation with a different outlook?
Well, I think inevitably as you get older, some people get a little cynical. So it is partly age, but it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is, whether there is some naivety, that's bound to be because there's less experience. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it means that you're more open-minded. You're open-minded in every respect. You're open-minded about the way society is developing, about other people's attitudes. You're open-minded a little bit more to risk maybe than people my age are. And I think all of that's a good thing. If you have good people around you who can help you avoid the biggest pitfalls.
Awesome. And you say working with young people and helping them with businesses, especially in the entrepreneurial space, is really that element of your work that you find really interesting. But what part of that and what outcome do you really find meaningful? Is it them having the confidence to go on and achieve their entrepreneurial ambitions? Is it them going on and helping others? Like, what part of the young enthusiasm do you find that really creates meaning in your work?
It's all of those things. I mean, probably the first thing is it's stimulation via diversity. So what I find exciting about my life is that every hour is different. One minute I can be working with a big business trying to solve a problem in the banking industry. The next minute I'm doing this podcast with you. An hour later, I'm helping someone who employs 4 people and has a business that makes a powder that goes in water that encourages people to drink more water, which, by the way, is doing incredibly well, to grow their business. So it's the diversity of experience across business, some government, some academic, some philanthropic. That's the first thing. And then I think the second thing would be when a youngster comes to talk to you about a business idea and you talk it through and they tell you what they're doing, and you can say, well, you know what, that is a great idea, but I wouldn't do it this way because if you do, this might happen, and that you know, and maybe I can help you avoid a pitfall because I've seen that happen before. There's a different way of doing it, gets you to the same place, but it's more certain to have a positive outcome. And so if you can help someone avoid an unnecessary mistake, then that's very satisfying. And ultimately, seeing someone come back to you a year or 2 years later even and say, I haven't forgotten that meeting we had, I've actually been following your idea and here's what happened. And it was a good thing that happened. That's exciting to hear.
Getting that positive feedback come back around definitely is affirming and meaningful, I think. But something I want to flip towards is, with so many roles at the moment, Robert, and you mentioned that stress before as well of when you were at Merrill. How do you prioritize day to day? How do you think about all of those different roles that you have? How do you prioritize between juggling so many different things at the moment?
So you have to be ruthlessly well organized, keep a really good diary. I have a fantastic PA who's actually worked with me for 25 years. She knows, you know, literally every aspect of what I'm doing every day, and that makes a massive difference. The other thing that helps is if you're the chairman of the things that you're involved in, which I often am, you know, ultimately you get to decide when the meetings are, which is quite helpful when it comes to a packed diary. So I'm pretty ruthless with my diary. That's really the main trick. And interestingly, you know, and I don't mean this as any criticism, it's just a difference. A lot of people your age don't have a diary. They kind of keep track of themselves in notes or on a spreadsheet or something, right? But it's not a formal calendar. And if there's one thing I would encourage, I do encourage every entrepreneur that I work with to do very quickly, is to get into something, you know, pretty boring like Outlook Calendar or iCal and use it religiously to organize their day.
Yeah, I often say to Charlie that Google Calendar runs my life, and that's the big thing that, again, I can stand by, is having a rigorous schedule that you stand by. And of course you're flexible within, but you know what you're doing pretty much every hour of every day. And even if that's down to the granular level of scheduling your downtime and your family time and your friend time, and the things that aren't work, you know when they are, you know how much time you're putting in each part. And
you two guys are extremely well organized. I mean, having done interviews for the book with recently with people like Sky News and LBC, for example, I'd say you're every bit as organized, if not more organized than they are. So
love to see it. That's Charlie's operation, so I'll credit him. I'll credit him with that one. But really thinking about the book is a good transition, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Gen Z today. We're going to be thinking about the impact that Gen Z have on work, the impact that digital has on Gen Z, all of these things together. But I think the first question in context of that, what does work mean? You know, I think the meaning of work, moving from the kind of industrial time to now, has really changed, and what work does for a person has really changed too. And the length of time that we work throughout life, as our life expectancy starts to increase, is also changing. We're going to be working for longer as each generation goes by. So, you know, is there a thing that work should mean to us, or is it down to us as individuals to find what work means for us? What does work what's the role that work needs to play as we go forward?
I think a couple of comments on that. One about the effect of COVID, and the second about what I call purpose. So I think COVID has highlighted that how the world of work is changing, and it just really brought forward a lot of trends that were already developing. And I'm thinking the kind of trends I'm thinking of are things like, you know, flexi time, remote working, the flexibility about where and when you work and what you do when you're working, really. which had already kicked off, right? And I think alongside that, the desire in your generation very often not to just do one thing actually, but to do several things and have this what's called the side hustle. But actually, there may not be a side hustle and one major thing. It could just be, you have a part-time employment and a part-time business of your own. So I think COVID has brought forward that thinking very rapidly. We suddenly discovered that actually we didn't really need to go into an office. Those of us who had jobs, we could equally well work from home most of the time. And if there were resources that were in the office that we needed, we simply organised them digitally to be available to us in a different setting. We probably also learned actually that working between say 9 and 5 wasn't particularly important either. We could work whenever it suited us. And if there's one thing that technology does, it facilitates you working wherever and whenever you want. And COVID's illustrated that in spades. So I think the whole nature of work is changing, and that's part of the way your generation sees the world, which is having grown up largely in a world dominated by the online. You don't see a boundary between the online world and the offline world in the way my generation does. If we talk about a conversation is two human beings standing in a room looking at each other, right? When you talk about a conversation, it could be a text conversation or an instant messaging conversation. And actually, interestingly, half the people in my generation don't realize that when you say conversation, you don't mean conversation as we mean it. We mean face-to-face, live. You could simply mean a text exchange. So, sorry, I've completely lost my track. Where are we heading with that?
No, it's a good thought. I think the final point would be about how the different generations label things that are online and offline. But the original point was thinking, just what does work mean? What does work
purpose.
change?
Sorry, we're coming to purpose, right?
Yeah.
So in the course of writing the book, I interviewed about 200 people your age, right? And half of them pitched business ideas, or at least what I thought were going to be business ideas. And actually, halfway through their pitch, I suddenly realized that wasn't a business at all. It was a social enterprise. It was a business that was looking to do something significant for society. So it might be a better waste management process in terms of recycling. It might be one of them was a personalized water bottle that stopped you buying plastic bottles, for example. So what came through very clearly is that your generation doesn't see the capitalist business model the way my generation did. It's not about big brands making profits over a prolonged period for their shareholders. For a business to be sustainable in the eyes of your generation and to have a future, it has to have a purpose. And that purpose has to be doing something useful, not just making money. So I think in my lifetime, we've seen the advent of something called corporate social responsibility, which is where, if you like, in the process of making money, a company also had to do something for its local community. That has now morphed completely the other way around, to the point that if a company doesn't have a very obvious purpose in society, people in your generation don't want to buy their products and services. And every boardroom needs to be focused on explaining to its outside stakeholders what its purpose in this very literal sense is. And that purpose better not be just making returns for shareholders. Actually, the two biggest culprits, I would argue, in not realizing this and not addressing it are Google and Facebook. But I'm sure we're going to come to talk about them more in the context of online harms in the book.
Nice. I think that mission-centric approach from Gen Z is really, really important. In fact, that's kind of what stands out from what they're looking for from their work, from what I've observed and seen. But how do you think it will affect, beyond just the purchasing of certain services or goods, the interaction between where people want to work, and what do you think employers who perhaps aren't currently mission-centric or are now adjusting to it because they realize the demand for it, what can they do to attract these young Gen Z talent who want this mission-centric approach to their life, really, and to their work more centrally than that?
So a couple of things I'd like to focus on. The first, there are two parts to that question. I have a whole chapter in the book which is called "What Makes Generation Z Tick," and it's kind of the way I think your generation thinks about the world, particularly the business world, products, services, work. Okay, and then I'd like to come in the second part on to what does it mean for employers and how they approach recruiting, attracting, retaining, and developing the best talent. So let's start, and this is very much your I know your kind of core subject. So let's start with what makes your generation tick. So I think you're looking for choice, convenience, efficiency, fast and frictionless service, a sort of convenient customer journey. Most of that's out of necessity. Most of you are pretty young, so you don't have that much money, and therefore being economical is necessary. That's not a choice. But you're also looking not to make massive commitments. You're at the early stage of your life, so that's led to the whole concept of the gig or sharing economy and the concept of rent, not buy. In my generation, we wanted to buy assets as soon as we could. We wanted to own a car, we wanted to own a house. Your generation wants to use an asset just as long as they need it to get the experience of having it when it's convenient to them, and then hand it back to someone else to deal with the risks of ownership. So experiences for you, I think, and convenience are more important than ownership. I think the next big trend is hyper-personalization. So, my generation would have typically bought pretty standard products because the way the internet works, you're used to being served up with things under the algorithm which are hyper-personalized to your particular interests. I'm thinking about the news feed here and social media. Similarly, you're expecting, when you go and buy a pair of Nike shoes, you want to have your own color combination with your own logo. You want when you're buying Calvin Klein swimwear, you want to have your own color band with your own color combination. If you're buying a Lacoste t-shirt, you just don't want a standard one with the crocodile on the left lapel. You want to have your own banding and your own colors. Now, all of those companies have recognized that and enable you to do that. Walk into a shop or buy online, have a personalized product, and then have it delivered to your house 24 hours later. So sustainability is probably the next big one. You have much more regard as a generation to the fact that we are leaving you with a damaged planet. You want to do something about that. So you want companies to demonstrate how their products and services are sustainable. That's not just about the climate. It's about every aspect of sustainability. The next thing is you're not so impressed as we were with big advertising on television, on billboards. You're more interested in what each other think about products in peer-to-peer recommendations, and to some extent in the recommendations of celebrities and influencers, although you all know that influencers make money from making recommendations, so you're rightly skeptical, but you still do pay attention to them. So all of this is going to change the way business has to operate. And if you think about the advertising world, it means short, snappy videos that convey a product's or a company's purpose and the way in which that product or service is going to engage Generation Z by being sustainable. And if any businessman running a business doesn't realize the future of their business is about to be dependent on the content of Generation Z's digital wallet, I would say they're going to have a problem. Now, if you moving to the second part, if you want to talk about recruiting and attracting talent and retaining that talent, progressing through companies, how do we do that? Well, yours is a very ambitious generation, but it's also looking for meaning. As I said, it's looking for this issue of purpose around an employer. It also demands a high degree of technological sophistication in a company. So you can tell immediately, even just from the application process, whether the company gets it when it comes to technology and is going to provide you with, for example, a laptop or an iPhone to use to do your business on, to work on, and is going to be connected to the company through convenient apps and facilities that enable you to work wherever you want to work, whenever you want to work for the company. So high degree of technological sophistication, very important. Short, snappy application processes. The days of filling in long application forms, which are all different, take hours to fill in online. We're not hearing anything for months. We're not very good. What we need is what we call snapplications. So Snapchat actually developed the very concept of a snapplication. It's a quick, snappy process where you're actually seeing the person that you might recruit. You're hearing from them about their own personality and why they want to work for your company. TikTok now actually being used in the graduate application process by some of the biggest companies. Internships and the whole idea of what I call experiences, not jobs. So we wanted to work for big companies and go there for 5 years and have a progression. Very often I find youngsters now want to go somewhere for 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 months on the outside, and do what I call take, learn, move. So learn from their experience and then move on to the next thing. So companies need to think about shorter term roles, project-based work, customization of roles to what it is people are looking for, very much focusing on training, but they should expect youngsters to job hop more than they used to. Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn has this expression, a tour of duty. to describe working for LinkedIn. He expects you to go there for massive, max a year, rotate around the organization, learn. It should be transformational to you as a person, transformational to LinkedIn, and create long-term value in that process. Next thing is benefits, not salary. So we were looking for, each year to get a bigger salary and more consistent increases in our sort of benefits. You're looking for, does the office look cool? Is it in a cool and convenient location? How much holiday can I take? How conveniently can I take that holiday? Can I work remotely? Can I have flexi time? Have I got healthcare? So I think there's a much bigger emphasis on the office environment and benefits rather than just basic salaries. The next thing is that you're a very creative generation and you want your voice to be heard within the company. So you'll expect to be surveyed and your voice to be listened to. And you're entrepreneurial. So companies are going to need to encourage entrepreneurship within companies. And then finally, I think workplace design, given your focus on the climate, we're going to need to think about how to make offices more biophilic, meaning how do we bring the environment into the office and reflect it in the office environment. We need to think about how we use technology to support creativity. So virtual reality and augmented reality ideation tools. We're going to think about how we get people to focus in a period of intense digital overload. So silent rooms. And there's a really interesting subject, is really at the heart of my book in a way, is just at the time when AI is developing so fast, maybe the only jobs left for human beings will be the most complicated ones that only human beings can do. Are we simultaneously teaching your generation to multitask like digital bees, snacking around very short term on lots of multiple information sources, never able to really deep focus, a deep attend to a conversation, deep listen to a text, deep watch a film without constant interruption? And is that consistent with the world of AI? That's a really interesting question. So I think I've talked for too long. I'll stop there.
Awesome. That's quite a lot of coverage on exactly what Gen Z and what makes them tick, but also like how companies can appeal to them as well. With all this in mind, there's a lot of different things, and it can almost be overwhelming, should we say, for employers to adapt to this. And to what extent do you think that Gen Z are expecting too much? Like, are they coming in with these demands when they don't actually have the income or the benefits to back it up? And should they just really just do their time more than anything else, like we did before, like a generation before us did? Or is it about companies should have to adapt to it rather than Gen Z kind of doing their time before they're able to realize the benefits?
I think there are some employers who think that Gen Z are asking for too much. I tell you, those are not the employers that are going to be doing well in 10 years' time. In my humble opinion, I think you have to go with the times. In fact, you have to be ahead of the times. And if you look at the most progressive companies, they're right on these trends. They're all over this, and they're making sure. Your generation is now a third of the global population, so you can't ignore what a third of the global population wants. You might not like it. There's a hilarious interview with a 20-year-old going around on social media at the moment, with the 60-year-old interviewer and a 20-year-old interviewee. And it's kind of a skit on the mismatch of expectations between old-fashioned employers and Gen Z employees. And I strongly recommend you find it, watch it. It's absolutely hilarious. But it just illustrates how some employers are going to kind of do themselves out of recruitment completely if they don't adapt their practices.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's the approach that, personally, from my point of view, I think is the right one as well, is that you've got to adapt to it, because they're your workforce of the future, and they're also the consumers of the future as well. So having to really hear and listen to them is definitely what's important as well. And do you think with what makes Gen Z tick, but also when they're entering this workforce, that they can bring this digital nativity and this nativeness to the area, to the employment? Or do you think there's that multitasking creativity approach that they can almost change the role from within? Like, what new traits and skills do you think that Gen Z can bring that's inherently unique to themselves and it separates them from previous generations in the workforce?
Definitely. And actually, so just the process of marketing a book has been an interesting insight into this, because it's a very old-fashioned industry, the book writing and publishing, particularly publishing industry. It's quite traditional. It has very long lead times. It's sort of everything about it isn't consistent with Gen Z values pretty much, right? Which is possibly why your generation stopped reading books to the extent we did, and you get your information from digital news sources, social media. You're looking for shorter, snack-sized pieces of information, not a 350-page book, right? So when it comes to marketing the book, you have to think about that. So the very fact that we're doing a podcast, I mean, 10 years ago, podcasts didn't exist. And if you were marketing a book, you would go and do a book signing in a bookshop, or you'd go out and give an evening lecture. You wouldn't be doing a podcast. But actually, a podcast is a much more efficient way of getting your message out to a much wider range of people than either of those things. Much more efficient. So I think there are a whole range of ways. Just my own approach to social media. I've now been working on my LinkedIn presence for 3 or 4 years. I'm what they call a top 1% social selling influencer on LinkedIn, which I had 20-odd thousand connections, which sounds like nothing if you're a Facebook or Instagrammer, but actually on LinkedIn, that's huge. It puts you in the top 1% of all influencers if you have high engagement, which I do. So, yeah, but this is not language that book publishers are familiar with or have focused on until very recently. So, exactly to your point, Charlie, you have to say to yourself, well, what's going to make someone 20 be interested in buy this book? And then you've got to go down that route. Otherwise, you're not going to sell any, which means you've got to have a Kindle, you've got to have an Audible version, you've got to do podcasts, you've got to do snappy presentations that are eye-catching and engaging on social media, turning up in Daunts in Notting Hill, whilst a great experience probably for the author to actually meet 1 or 2 human beings for once, is not actually going to sell you many books, probably.
Kind of the traditional big book launcher, big bookstore, author signs book isn't quite gonna cut it. I think
certainly not during lockdown, it isn't.
No, definitely not. I think something to pick up on from all of the themes that we talked about is this idea of a generational gap between Gen Z and everyone else, even the generations closer to Gen Z. There's the technology that's moving quick. We mentioned AI, all of these things. Social media is a massive part of that. How concerned should we all be about that gap and whether businesses can work to fill it and meet some of these new demands? But actually, is it just as big of a concern that older generations are not catching up, whether that's in terms of skills, understanding, the empathy with Gen Z? Kind of how concerned should we be?
That's a really difficult question to answer. In a way, it's sort of what my book was aimed at trying to help. Because there's something in it for your generation, there's something in it for parents, there's something in it for educators, and there's something in it for government. And it's all about bridging the gap, in fact, of understanding between the generations. I don't think we should be too worried. So I think progressive businesses will get there quickly, and then slower businesses will follow progressive businesses because they'll have to. And, some parents are better attuned to what their kids are really doing than others, and they'll tell their friends, and it'll be, I'm not worried about it. I think there is a big gap in misunderstanding. And actually, really what my book tries to do is to say, if you think the difference between millennials and Gen Z is incremental change, forget it. It's huge. It's literally like 180 degrees different from anything that's come before. And most people my age haven't joined up the various things they might be seeing. They might see you wanting to message, not talk. They might see you or think about you forming a new relationship over the internet using a dating app rather than going to the pub or a youth club, as we would have done in our day. They might see you listening to a podcast or Audible rather than reading a book, but they haven't joined it all up to say, this is absolutely enormously different from what we grew up in, and it isn't going back, because some of the temptation in my generation to say, oh, well, it's not as good as it used to be, and they'll get over it and it'll go back to how it used to be. Well, forget it. It's not going to happen. It's changed fundamentally forever and enormously. And so what the book tries to do is draw all that together for my generation and explain how it's changed, but also hopefully to explain to some of you how it's changed, so you can see why we don't understand sometimes, what you're doing. So, for example, screen time, right? So 70% of parents say they're worried about how much time their kids spend on screens. Well, the issue is not screen time, because all screen time is not equal and all users are not equal. What I mean by that is if you're on a screen educating yourself at school, or you're watching a film and you're actually properly watching a film, not doing 3 other things at the same time, or indeed reading a book, all that's fine. You're in a sense, you're doing yourself good. If you are spending 5 hours a day chilling and scrolling through social media or gaming, maybe not so good. So you can't just talk about screen time. You have to talk about what you're doing when you're on screen and some of the pitfalls of the negative aspects of social media and gaming, for example. And again, I don't think my generation has necessarily clocked that they can't expect low screen time. That comes with being your age. The question is, what are you doing on the screen, and is it good or bad?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point. I'll be sure to quote that one, because not all screen time is created equal is a really interesting one, because it's almost easy on the flip side of that to blame social media companies, right? It's the big tech companies' fault. They're the root of all evil. It's kind of all their fault, and a lot of people have seen
I think they probably are the root of most evil, but
probably, yeah.
I mean, the one thing that just to add is not just that all screen time isn't equal, but all users aren't equal. So you might be able to spend 2 hours on social media, see some pretty negative stuff, right? You might see that a friend of yours is depressed, anxious, possibly, going to self-harm. You might be quite positive at the end of your 2-hour session. Someone else who has body dysmorphia or is inconfident or just has a problem with their life at that particular moment could spend 2 hours on social media, sop up a load of negativity, and at the end feel even more depressed, themselves have developed a problem. And so, again, it isn't about screen time, it's about what you're doing when you're there, but it's also about your own vulnerabilities and your own state of mind. And for some people, in the wrong frame of mind or with high vulnerability, a lot of screen time on social media and or gaming or porn, to bring in another big problem, big in the press today, because the new reports just come out highlighting the massive problem we've got and the link between porn and violence against women. These things do need attention.
No, they do, and I think the next point would be, a lot of people have seen things like the social dilemma. They understand that the amount of screen time that they have, the habits that they have, how they themselves walk away from their own social gaming or any session on the internet or on their devices. They understand how it impacts them, but they might not necessarily understand the solutions or the next steps or the actual practicalities behind that. And I know that was a big criticism of yours from the social dilemma, thinking, okay, what next then?
Yeah, so the social dilemma was a great way of getting onto the radar screen of people who hadn't thought about it before, how the surveillance economy works, how your attention is basically hijacked in the interest of making profits for big tech companies. What it didn't do was tell the story through the eyes of anybody in your generation, and it didn't come up with any solutions. So it left you at the end a little bit kind of knowing what you already knew, now understanding it better, but feeling a bit sort of like, oh Christ, well now what do I do? Yeah. So I'm actually trying to work on a documentary that would take that story on, tell it through the eyes of people your age, so their experiences of the internet, good and bad, so that it's balanced, not sensational. And then talk about, well, okay, if you buy that, so what are some of the solutions?
Yeah, no, it's powerful. And I think it's something that, on the flip side of what you mentioned of not all screen time users are equal, not all solutions are going to be equal as a result of that. And actually, mixed with that hyper personalization, it probably is going to be that we're all going to have to self-manage. We're all going to have to self-report with our own companies and our own workplaces in a different way to understand how we work, whether that's our own work patterns, whether that's the amount of time that we spend across all of our devices that enables us to work in a certain way, or our own preferences for remote versus office work. This is going to have to become a really open channel of conversation, because if businesses don't get the data of what their workforce needs, whether that's across Gen Z or everyone else, they're not going to know how to adapt and how to find those solutions.
So one of the interesting developments this year is the UK government is bringing in something called the Online Harms Bill. You should think of this a bit like health and safety legislation for social media. So what it's going to do for the first time is require the big tech companies to assess what damage their services might be having on users. And if they, particularly youngsters, and if they assess that it could be causing damage in the way I've just described, they then need to take action to mitigate the harms caused. And Ofcom, our regulator, our media regulator, will have the obligation of annually assessing whether the big tech companies are mitigating harm sufficiently. And if they're not, they'll have the right to fine those companies, big fines, for not taking sufficient action to protect the public and particularly kids from potential harm. So this is actually really, and the government here deserves big credit, because this is genuinely world-leading, sort of groundbreaking legislation. No one has done this anywhere around the world quite this way. It's pretty, it's pretty far-reaching, and we'll have to give it 2 or 3 years to see how it works. But I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting kind of conclusion here to bring into that hyper personalization at a lot of levels. There's needing what you want and what you desire out of work, but also out of your interaction with technology to achieve certain outcomes. I guess the thought that's coming to my head is that, to what extent do we know what we need and what we want versus what actually we could potentially become if we adapted to a new system or new technology or new outcome? So I guess with the hyper personalization, are we always choosing the most easy option rather than the one that's more difficult? Because it might be more difficult to abide by a different way of thinking because it's harder, but if that achieves a better outcome and is more effective, more efficient, then should we listen to that rather than what is our preference and thus what we have been most comfortable with?
Well, you used an interesting expression. You said, are we choosing? And the problem with the way algorithms work is you might make some initial choices at the beginning, and the algorithm then picks up on them, and then it feeds you more of the same. So whilst in theory you're choosing after the sort of first bit, you may not be choosing, you may just be being reinforced in what you chose at a particular point in time, right? So, and that is a problem, because what that leads to is you living in your own little echo chamber, or filter bubble, as they're called, where you constantly get fed the same kind of things because that's what the algorithm knows and thinks that you like. And the problem with that, it's one of the striking observations of one of the youngsters in my book, is he said, I find it almost impossible to have a serious debate with anybody about politics anymore, because when I sit down with them, we don't realize that we don't get the same news. So the facts that I think are the facts are not the facts that she thinks are the facts, because she's watching a different set of facts. Whereas in my generation, there's basically 4 newspapers and 2 news channels, and it is what it is, kind of thing, right? So I think that is a big issue. It's not so much fake news, but biased news, which is biased to reinforce your beliefs. As you say, it's comfortable. The other thing it does, by the way, is it tends to accentuate a populist view, which makes it very difficult for people to express outlying views. So what you tend to find is that people who have views which are not the mainstream find it very difficult to express their views without simply being abused, really quite vitriolically abused by the centre. And Twitter is probably the worst example of this, but even I was just noticing my Facebook pages for the book has some images on it, and one of the images is an image of a diverse group of children all sitting on their devices, and lots of people actually have made racist comments about one of the pictures because it's a diverse group of people and they're sort of complaining it's politically correct. Well, honestly, you've really got nothing better to do than sit on Facebook criticizing someone's collateral for a book campaign. I mean, it's very sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting where it goes both ways, isn't it? Being too PC, but then also calling out being too PC as well, like both ends of the spectrum. Like, why are we even having this conversation? It's pretty crazy. I think that echo chamber really speaks to, I think, what you said on Twitter as well. There is now a sub platform that people have kind of moved from Twitter onto because they've had their voices be restricted by other people, and almost that removal of free speech as an aspect of it as well. Obviously, there's one thing inciting violence, but another thing just kind of giving your point of view as well. So that whole extent to which we have free speech is kind of a really interesting perspective more broadly as well.
But if to have free speech. I don't know whether you're thinking of Reddit or which platform you're thinking of, but if to have free speech, you have to have anonymity, because you can't actually identify yourself if you want to express a view that's out with the mainstream. That's not good news. And the other thing I'd observe is the level of anger and hatred and vitriol that is so commonly expressed on these platforms. I mean, there are a lot of, it seems, very unhappy and very angry people in society. If the average message on some of these platforms is to have a more polarized society than we've probably had, in recent history. Why is that? Is it because social media is encouraging that outcome, not deliberately, but because of the way the algorithms work? So I think there are really big issues around fake news and free speech that really need to be addressed quite urgently.
Nice. I think that probably brings an overarching thought to this entire conversation of there are a lot of positives, a lot of reasons for hope, should we say, for Gen Z and for what they can achieve, especially with their kind of value-driven approach to life, to work more broadly. But there's also quite a lot of challenges that they're going to face on that journey as well. For you, in your own words, and I guess in your own thoughts, how would you kind of define the next 5-10 years of Gen Z in the workplace? And do you think there's going to be a set kind of outcome that's destined to appear a certain way, or do you think that we'll achieve it if we overcome certain obstacles to get there?
And the first thing to say is I think my generation is leaving you a pretty miserable set of cards. Whether it be a damaged planet, the sort of ongoing global war on terror, COVID debt, I could go on, the overhang of the global financial crisis. So I think what we're going to see over the next 5-10 years is absolutely enormous and rapid change in the way companies work. And it will be driven by your generation, because as I said earlier on in the interview, I think your generation wants to see businesses supporting society to solve some of these issues. And so I think, as I said, the far-reaching, forward-looking companies will be very rapidly building a narrative about what they're doing that's good for society in the process of making their products and services. And these companies will do well and others will have to follow. So I think you're going to see almost a revolution in the capitalist model, and that will be led by, supported by, reinforced by, encouraged by Generation Z, and great. I think it's going to be fantastic. So I'm actually very positive about the ability of your generation to have an impact and for it to have a good impact.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the optimist approach, should we say, of the outcome that we're coming towards. I think given that without employees, without people, you have no business, then really you have to adapt what you do internally to benefit those that are going to work for you. I think that approach of actually changing what is a backward model, should we say, of capitalism that thrives on depleting resources and really trying to be more sustainable and defining that, I think is a really big wider issue here. I think I'm just off the back of watching that Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix, and that kind of highlights sustainability as a word and a meaning. And I think that key phrase that is being sold to us through different methods, actually making it a core element of the business rather than just a greenwashing tool, I think will be a really interesting approach going forward as well.
I'm very, very positive about, as I said, about the effect your generation can have, and partly because of the 200 youngsters I met, and stand by to help anybody who has good ideas to try and bring them to fruition.
Awesome. And if Ryan's got any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the kind of optimist approach is definitely one to try and bring. And I think if my management degree has shown me anything, it's that we need to find the business models that are going to enable that change, and not just talk about change and talk about impact and sustainability and all these things, but change the models themselves that are the heart of the businesses that will become the infrastructure of that future. If it exists yet, then it needs to be changed. If it doesn't exist yet, then we need to create it. So super exciting. I think, Robert, as well, one last thought from you. I'd love to know if there's an interview or a chapter or a specific quote that stands out from the book, from the journey of creating Born Digital. Is there one interview that stands out to you?
There's one statistic, which is that 54% of Generation Z interviewed said that if their parents knew what really went on social media, they'd be a lot more worried than they are at the moment, which made me laugh because that's kind of how I think about it. What else would I pick out? I don't know if there's one. The book covers so many different aspects of the way you meet each other, the kinds of relationships you have, your attitude to work, your attitude to purpose, your attitude to religion, the way you engage in politics. It tries to look at all these things, and there's so much there. To try and summarize it in one quote or interview would be really tough. But I do hope some of your listeners will take a look, because I think they would find it interesting.
Yeah, no, excited to pick it up. So what would be our closing thoughts then? We've spoken a lot today about the employer side, the employee side of Generation Z. We've spoken about distraction, we've spoken about tech, all of these different things together. What could be our last word for both sides of that equation, the employees and employers, to really help manifest some of this change that we're talking about?
Well, I think for employers, if you're not focused on purpose and you're not focused on thinking about how you attract Generation Z, then you don't have a business in the future. And if you're Generation Z, my advice is very simply go for it. If you think you've got a good idea, then go and find a mentor who's been around the block a bit longer, work with them and try and make it happen, because the only thing limiting most people's achievements is not their ability, it's their ambition. It's not thinking big enough. So my advice is think big and go for it.
Amazing, fantastic advice. So thinking about Born Digital as well, then obviously people can connect with you personally over on LinkedIn, but where can people pick up the book?
So if they want the money to go to charity, they should buy it through my website, which is www.robertwigley.uk, or it's available on Amazon, Kindle or Audible, or if you're not in the UK, there's a company called www.bookdepository.com that has free worldwide shipping, which is actually part of Amazon. But just for those who are interested, if you buy it through the website, £20 goes towards charity donations. If you buy it through Amazon, £7.70 goes towards charity. That's how a monopoly works. It's not good for authors. Not that I'm an author, really, but yeah, I feel for authors, because I think they're getting a bad deal from the book distributors.
Yeah, amazing, cool. Well, I'll make sure I link all of those in the description, and maybe we'll leave Amazon out of it to push people towards the website. But yeah, thank you so much for jumping on, Robert. I think we've had a fantastic episode. Hope you enjoyed it.
Charlie and Ryan, thank you so much for having me. I think you've got a great product here. I wish you the very best.